Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, a committee of MPs has strongly criticised Britain's military intervention in Libya in 2011, accusing David Cameron of pursuing an opportunist policy of regime change in removing Colonel Gaddafi. The Foreign Affairs Select Committee also said there was no coherent strategy for the aftermath, leaving Libya in chaos and giving a foothold to so-called Islamic State. But ministers and officials involved in the decision to go to war have been defending the intervention. Here's James Landale.
Libya is an unstable country, a place where militias compete for power, where the Islamic State group has a foothold, where migrants pour across unprotected borders en route for the sea. It is a chaotic picture which, MPs say, is the result of David Cameron's decision 5 years ago to send in warplanes to support rebels fighting against Colonel Gaddafi.
We were not prepared for the consequences of a regime change in Libya, and all the analysis being done here was based on, frankly, a pretty limited understanding of exactly what the situation in Libya was.
The aim of the intervention in March 2011 was to protect people living here in Benghazi who were threatened by Gaddafi's forces. But the Foreign Affairs Committee says the threat to civilians was overstated by inaccurate intelligence. And over the summer, as fighting continued, the aim of the operation changed from protecting civilians to getting rid of Gaddafi. And the committee said this was an opportunist policy of regime change that was not underpinned by a strategy to support Libya afterwards. In particular, the MPs say more should have been done to use Tony Blair's contacts to see if a political deal was possible, which could have left Gaddafi in power.
Is it better to allow a dictator who may be appropriate to the country and to the times in which we're living to remain in power to ensure stability rather than risk the chaos of an unstable country such as Libya?
Thank you!
In September 2011, after Gaddafi's regime had fallen, Mr. Cameron and the then French president visited Libya and told the people they had shown the courage of lions.
Your friends in Britain and in France will stand with you as you build your democracy and build your country for the future.
And yet the Foreign Affairs Committee says that this did not happen, and David Cameron was ultimately responsible for the failure to develop a coherent Libya strategy. But diplomats and ministers involved in the decision to intervene said it was backed by MPs and the United Nations. It was responding to a real threat, and it wasn't clear that leaving Gaddafi in place would have ensured a better outcome.
In Iraq, we went in with major forces. It didn't turn out very well. In Syria, we chose not to get involved. I mean, that's also catastrophic. In Libya, we went in a limited, targeted way in support of insurgencies on the ground. Yes, the situation is bad, but I wouldn't rule out at all that in 5 years, the various parties will have got together and begun to build something in Libya.
But the situation on the ground makes such optimism rare. In Libya, politics still comes second to violence. James Landale, BBC News.
Now, when David Cameron made his fateful decision to call a referendum on Britain's membership of the European Union, he probably never imagined quite how quickly defeat would lead to much of his legacy unravelling. In a moment, we'll be hearing now how he's been given the blame by MPs for the chaos that is Libya. But we begin tonight with Brexit and a new warning from the President of the European Commission that Britain could not have an a la carte option after leaving the EU. Here's our political editor, Gary Gibbon.
The President of the European Commission was giving his annual report to the European Parliament. He insisted the EU would survive Britain's departure. He warned Britain it should forget any thoughts of keeping the advantages of single market membership if it restricts the freedom of EU citizens to come to Britain.
There can be no à la carte access to the single market.
The MEP, who's the European Parliament's point man on the Brexit negotiations, said Europe could improve without Britain on board.
Let's stop on both sides of the channel our collective depression. And let's stop the politics of division and seize this opportunity not to kill Europe, as some of you want, but to reinvent Europe. Thank you.
There's profound concern in the City of London that financial services here could sprout up in Paris and other EU financial centres, lured by the privileges of single market membership, denied to Britain. Oliver Letwin is the man David Cameron asked to look at negotiation strategies post-Brexit. He only got 2 weeks in that job, but it left him deeply worried.
The accountants, the lawyers, the consultants, the many hundreds of thousands of people working in and around the City of London who, between them, generate a large part of the British economy. There's a danger that those people would gradually seep away to Frankfurt or Paris or some other financial centre if the retail financial services went. And of course, if that were to happen, then gradually too the wholesale markets might begin to migrate, and you could eventually see a massive blow.
Oliver Letwin says the government might just get a deal that protects service sector jobs. On his trawl through Whitehall, he says he discovered hundreds of agreements Britain has with European countries across a whole range of subjects like security, defence, which he hopes could make Europe look differently at Britain's demands.
The trick here is to identify enough cases in which there are things our counterpart governments want that we would be willing to give to build up a kind of war chest for trading in order to get as much as possible, both by way of control of migration and by way of access for financial and professional services.
Providing a solution for that.
Former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, Paul Tucker, now a Harvard lecturer, has joined up with EU politicians and officials, daring to think Europe might seize this moment to construct an outer ring of membership with looser ties.
This idea of concentric circles is one that's been hovering around for a long time and is reasonably back on the table as something to contemplate.
Some of the most fervent pro-Leave Tory MPs think that sort of talk is delusional, and they are already organising to try and make Britain's exit from the EU much quicker. They doubt the value of EU institutions anyway. They don't think the EU's about to do us any favours, and they intend to force the pace on Theresa May.
If you stick to the dogma of saying that for tariff-free access, to reciprocal tariff-free access with the single market, we must maintain the free movement of people, then you will inevitably drive us towards no deal.
In the European Parliament, Nigel Farage was sounding his own pessimistic note on the negotiations. The European Commission President spoke of his outrage at the rise in hate crime stirred up in Britain by the referendum campaign.
We Europeans can never accept, never, Polish workers being harassed, beaten up or even murdered in the streets of Essex.
In Essex today, police were joined by 2 Polish police officers there to reassure Polish residents in the area after the killing of a Polish man in Harlow last month. They said they planned to patrol for at least 1 week.
And as if a legacy of Britain leaving the EU against his advice wasn't enough, David Cameron today found himself being partly blamed for the rise of ISIS. MPs on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee said that a lack of planning after the bombing of Libya in 2011 led to chaos there and the growing influence of the Islamic State group. Here's our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Jonathan Rugman.
5 years ago tomorrow, David Cameron was greeted in Libya to cries of thank you.
Colonel Gaddafi.
This the most Blair-like moment of his foreign policy. Another dictator gone.
Your friends in Britain and in France will stand with you as you build your democracy and build your country for the future. Thank you very much.
Mr. Cameron resigned from Parliament this week, just ahead of the hubris of another British intervention being followed by the nemesis of another damning report. The Foreign Affairs Committee says the result in Libya was political and economic collapse, inter-militia and inter-tribal warfare, humanitarian and migrant crises, widespread human rights violations, the spread of Gaddafi regime weapons across the region, and the growth of ISIL in North Africa. In other words, a long list. David Cameron's multi-million-pound memoirs will probably be his response, but we've heard this conclusion before.
If you are going to intervene, you better be absolutely crystal clear what your policy objective is, that you have the military means to deliver it, and you can then have whatever tools you need to back up the consequence of your military intervention.
Colonel Gaddafi had threatened to attack his people like rats, but the report says the government wrongly took the Libyan leader's rhetoric at face value.
Get out of your homes and attack the rats in their dens.
The relationship Tony Blair had previously built with Gaddafi was cast aside when it might have led to a negotiated peace. But even if Islamic State was unleashed here, Al-Qaeda had been there long before, and arguably the lack of intervention in Syria shows the risk of doing little.
We did the best we could with what we had at the request of Libyans themselves, and now, after some years and much difficulty, they are still trying. Contrast that with Syria. 500,000 dead, its population displaced, because nobody sought to help the population when a dictator said, I'm going to kill them.
As far as I'm concerned, I think it was right to get rid of Gaddafi, but the problem was there was absolutely no strategy to what to do with Libya once Gaddafi is gone. There were no institutions in Libya, so only Gaddafi was the main institution.
And without a murderous despot in charge of the coast, Africans are migrating en masse to Europe, more than 2,700 on a single day this month. Libya hasn't turned out well, but hindsight is a wonderful thing. And any Prime Minister faces the same dilemma: how to resist political and media pressure at the height of any crisis to do something when doing less may prove better in the long run. Jonathan Rugman, Channel 4 News, at the Foreign Office.
Well, let's get back to our political editor, Gary Gibbon. Gary, he only resigned on Monday. He's having a pretty bad week. Can it get any worse? And is that comparison with Tony Blair just?
Well, a lot of his friends are really quite miffed on his behalf about this report on Libya. They say the comparisons with Chilcot are ridiculous. For one thing, I can pick it up. Nothing like the same number of witnesses, not talking to, not seeing lots of extra evidence, thin, partial, they call it. They're pretty upset about that. And as you say, it comes after a week that starts with grammar schools. Theresa May, it seems, to friends of David Cameron, increasingly defining herself on a lot of domestic political issues as in opposition to him. But we're about to see her conclusion of the nuclear energy policy of David Cameron's that she put on pause. She may yet have to sign up to that pretty soon, perhaps. And that's a reminder that no matter these early moments when the spotlight falls on your predecessor, when you're in that building, when you're in number 10, the focus really is, on the whole, unremittingly on you.
Gary, thanks very much indeed.